your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition with Jeanette Roche.
Hello, thanks for joining us for a look back at Alberta this week. A woman being held in an RCMP jail in the Piikani Nation says she was sexually assaulted by one of the guards. Police say the incident allegedly occurred in the early morning hours of October 13th. The investigation, which included a review of the cell block recording, resulted in charges being laid against a corpse of commissionaire guard. 32-year-old Charles Provost, a resident of Brockett, has been removed from his position as guard and faces a count of sexual assault and one count of breach of trust. He was released from custody and will appear in court on November 23rd. The Chinook High School football team has been cleared to resume practices, but has yet to be cleared for game action. This is a result of 4 football players from the school being charged with sexually assaulting another player who is just 16 years old. The investigation into the incident continues. In a release, the Lethbridge School Division says new measures are being put in place to help provide a safe and welcoming environment for all members of the school's football team. They include enhanced supervision and safety practices for all team activities, trauma-informed activities to help better understand what led to this incident, education related to positive team culture and relationships, and enhanced wellness supports for members of the football team. Well, there has been a slight increase in the number of tent encampment complaints made to the City of Lethbridge. The Lethbridge Encampment Response Team presented an update to City Council on Tuesday afternoon on the encampment issue in the region. Eric Foster, an encampment support specialist with the city, says they are seeing many of the calls coming from the north side of Lethbridge.
It includes encampments as well as debris. And some of the correlation that we've noticed is that actually seems to be resolving around donation bins. So particularly around like the north side Walmart, that area, a lot of that debris is coming as a result of those bins. The low level of entrenchment continues despite the increase in reports. We are noticing that the compliance level is slowing a little slightly due to the cooler temperatures.
From October 11th through October 13th, there have been 130 encampment-related calls made to the city. So far this year, there have been 377 calls. In other news, the downtown BRZ is hoping to collaborate with the city to implement a cross-functional task force to help address crime in Lethbridge. The motion was brought up during City Council on Tuesday as the BRZ expressed concerns that crime continues to increase in the downtown core. Acting Mayor John Middleton Hope says the task force, to start, will only focus on one area of the city.
Displacement is a byproduct of action. Inaction also creates additional problems. So to start, it is very much focused on the downtown core. However, I anticipate that it will expand as more partners participate in this process.
That motion will be back in council on December 12th. Former Lethbridge Hurricanes player and 3-time Stanley Cup champion Brent Seabrook is set to become the newest inductee to the Hurricanes Wall of Honor in January at the NMAX Center. He played 4 seasons with the Canes from 2001 through 2005. He will be the 11th former player with the team to receive the distinction. Seabrook chatted with members of the Lethbridge media on Tuesday about the momentous honor. BCN's Micah Quinn has the details.
Brent Seabrook will be inducted into the player category of the Lethbridge Hurricanes Wall of Honor on January 26th of next year. He will also be the headliner guest for the 2024 Celebrity Dinner the following evening. After his time in the WHL, he was drafted by the Chicago Blackhawks and went on to win 3 Stanley Cup championships with the club until he retired in 2021. The former NHLer also won gold with Team Canada at the 2010 Winter Olympic Games in Vancouver, as Sidney Crosby scored the golden goal in overtime against the United States.
And then literally I was talking yesterday about it, and the next day we were fighting each other again, so I remember we won, we celebrated, we went into Vancouver and had a party. And the next morning, I think it was like 8 or 9 in the morning, we were bussing down to all the Blackhawks players that were at the Olympics were taking a bus down across the line, and we jumped on a plane and flew to New York to play the next night.
For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Up next, the Alberta government wants its own pension plan, but the province's opposition has something to say about it. First, a quick break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Alberta's opposition NDP finance critic is calling for an investigation into the province's pension consultation process. Shannon Phillips says she has written to the Alberta Ombudsman and that Albertans are being denied procedural fairness. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith's United Conservative government has launched a provincial debate on quitting the Canada Pension Plan and creating an Alberta-only one. An online public survey doesn't ask Albertans whether they want to stay or leave the federal plan, but asks them what kind of Alberta plan they would want instead.
But now Danielle Smith has a new harebrained scheme for an Alberta pension plan where she takes your money out of the CPP and does what exactly with it? We're not sure. That gambles your retirement security. So go to albertasfuture.ca. That's our survey where we ask you a simple question. Do you want to leave the CPP? Do you want Danielle Smith to gamble with your retirement?
Meanwhile, Premier Smith says an Alberta pension plan would actually benefit Albertans more than the Canadian pension plan, but that it's up to Albertans whether or not they even want to move forward with it.
I think people need to first make the decision about whether they want us to have an Alberta pension plan. That's what the reason, I mean, we've had this conversation going on in our province for as long as I can remember of how do we assert the rights in Alberta the same way Quebec has. Quebec has a pension plan. They have their own collection of taxes. They have their own police force. They manage their own immigration. And so this conversation has been going on for a very long time in Alberta. My predecessor started the process with the Fair Deal panel. The Albertans asked for us to do an analysis. The analysis was done. We've released it, and now it's up to Albertans to tell us if they want to move forward.
Coming up later in the show, we have much more of that exclusive interview with Alberta Premier Danielle Smith and our own Hal Roberts. An Alberta judge has dismissed an Edmonton law student's challenge to the legal profession's mandatory oath of allegiance to the monarch. Prabjot Singh Wiring has argued that portion of the oath violates his charter rights to religious freedom and equality. Wiring, who is an Amritkari Sheikh, says that he's only allowed to pledge allegiance to a divine being in his religion. Court of King's Bench Justice Barbara Johnston says the oath of allegiance to the monarch was not to a person, but a symbol to uphold and maintain the rule of law. Edmonton police are warning the public about a sexual offender who was recently released from jail. They say 28-year-old David Adams was released after serving time for failing to comply with probation conditions. He was convicted in February on 2 counts of indecent acts. Police say he is living in Edmonton and not allowed near certain areas where children congregate. And in other news, Alberta government officials say they are working on ways to provide Albertans with better access to family doctors and healthcare professionals. Health Minister Adriana LaGrange says that they will be moving forward with recommendations made by a range of groups on an advisory panel. Some of the recommendations include creating a primary healthcare division within Alberta Health, working with the Alberta Medical Association to create a task force to recommend a new payment model for physicians, and that doctors will be paid fairly.
We are taking other immediate actions as well, including providing $57 million over 3 years to family physicians and nurse practitioners with the initial support they need to help manage their increasing number of patients. This funding is worth up to $10,000 each year for an individual physician. I know for many family physicians, this initial investment is an important first step in stabilization.
More money will be going to bring in more qualified nurses to Alberta. The province announced that $11 million will go toward nurse bridging programs to help train internationally educated nurses. Advanced Education Minister Rajan Sawhney made the announcement at the University of Lethbridge. She says these nurses will now have access to an additional over 1,200 spaces at post-secondary institutions so they can complete the programs that they need for certification in Alberta.
This includes 848 new seats for registered nurses and 373 new seats for licensed practical nurses at 9 post-secondary institutions across the province. These new seats are being created over 3 years to help nurses who are trained in other countries become licensed to work and live here in Alberta. This is long, long overdue, and I'm so pleased to be making this announcement today.
In Lethbridge, $2.4 million and 100 seats will go to the University of Lethbridge and Lethbridge College. The college will also be partnering with Bow Valley College to provide an extra 108 seats. After the break, our exclusive interview with the Alberta Premier. Keep it right here.
They've been acting illegally for the last 4 years. They've been now operating outside the Constitution, which is the highest law in the land, and they have an expectation of cooperative federalism. That's the principle on which our country is built.
Welcome back. Recently, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled against Ottawa's No More Pipelines Bill, C-69. 5 of the 7 judges ruled that most of it was unconstitutional because it seeks to regulate activities within the provincial jurisdiction. Our own BCN's Hal Roberts had an exclusive interview with the Premier to discuss this, along with the potential of opting out of the Canada Pension Plan. Here is part 1 of that interview.
Now, you look at this as a victory, but Federal Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault says the 5-2 ruling is just the opinions of the judges, and his government's going to, well, we're going to move forward anyway. Your thoughts?
Well, they're wrong. I mean, the way the Supreme Court works is that you, as a province, put forward a reference case to your own Court of Appeal, which we did, and we won that, and then it goes on to the Supreme Court, and we won that as well. And so the federal government needs to read the case. They need to make sure that they're internalizing what it says, because it was a pretty harsh ruling. It essentially says they've been acting illegally for the last 4 years. They've been now operating outside the Constitution, which is the highest law in the land, and they have an expectation of cooperative federalism. That's the principle on which our country is built. And I can tell you that we will be invoking and waving around that Supreme Court judgment every time the federal government steps out of their lane.
So what will this really mean for Alberta's energy sector?
It will mean that, once again, we have the authority to be able to approve our own projects within our own borders. The federal government has a very limited role in being able to do environmental assessments. The court said that if it's a federal project, it has to be on federal land, federally funded, or international. Anything that is within the borders of Alberta, so our oil sands projects, our SAGD projects, if we're developing our generation projects, transmission lines within our province, pipelines within our province, highways within our province, all of those now are firmly within provincial jurisdiction, and we intend to tell the world that Alberta's open for business.
The opposition NDP here in the province has said that our relationship with Ottawa really needs to get better and not so combative, so that the two governments can work better together. Now, how can you really have a healthy working relationship with the Trudeau Liberals while also standing up for Albertans, Premier Smith?
Well, I have to tell you, like, the NDP allowed for the Constitution to be violated with Bill C-48, Bill C-69, and they did nothing about it. It took us getting into office to fight back against it, and thank heavens we did. Otherwise, we'd still have this unconstitutional act that would be governing our affairs. So I don't think the NDP has any credibility. And my view is I have engaged in cooperative federalism from the very first phone call that I had with Justin Trudeau. I told him I wanted to work with him on carbon neutrality targets by 2050. I told him we were going to create an emissions reduction plan. We did. We released that in April. I asked him if he would work with us at a joint table so that we could come to some agreement about what the milestones should be along the way. And my DMs are in Ottawa as we speak, meeting with them to try to come to those agreements. We had a great relationship during the fires. They were very helpful in making sure that First Nations communities had the evacuation support that they needed, the rebuilding support that they needed. They assisted us with the Canadian Armed Forces fighting. And we also signed a $24 billion healthcare deal that will confirm that we're upholding the principles of the Canada Health Act. So yes, we can work collaboratively. The federal government has to stop picking fights with us. That's the key. If they stop picking fights with us, then we won't have to fight back. We can engage in a spirit of cooperation, but we need a willing partner at the table. And they, on certain issues, have not been a willing or very collaborative partner.
We had federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre on our program a few months ago, and we talked extensively about the carbon tax and how it's hurting Canadians. What are you seeing about the impact of the federal carbon tax here in our province in Alberta?
It's doubly devastating because we rely so much on natural gas to heat our homes. And so when people get the double whammy of needing to keep their lights on longer in the wintertime as well as heat their homes, they're getting massive bills. And the number of people who've told me that their carbon tax bill is oftentimes larger than the base cost of gas. That's the reality of what our people here are facing. So I'm supportive of Pierre Poilievre's view that we shouldn't have a retail carbon tax. I think that the great emissions reduction is going to happen with our industrial players, with the oil sands pathways group planning to be net zero by 2050, a petrochemical project, Dow Chemical, talking about net zero petrochemical industry, Air Products, a net zero hydrogen facility. Even Heidelberg is a cement factory. They are building the first net zero cement factory in Edmonton next year. Those are the things that are going to make dramatic emissions reductions. In addition, making sure that we export more clean LNG so that we can replace coal and wood and other polluting fuels internationally. Those are the things that are going to make a major difference. Punishing seniors, low-income people, the most vulnerable, in the dead of winter in January, it's not fair, it's not right. And that's why we believe that the retail carbon tax has got to go.
Don't go away, because when we return, we dive into the potential of an Alberta pension plan in our exclusive with Premier Danielle Smith. Welcome back. Well, many seniors have said they're concerned about Alberta pulling out of the Canada Pension Plan. So how will the province's premier put their minds at ease? Here is part 2 of our exclusive interview with Alberta Premier Danielle Smith.
Finance Minister Nate Horner says if our province does abandon the Canada Pension Plan for an Alberta-made version, it will not adopt Quebec's model. So Premier Smith, how will Alberta's version be different?
I think people need to first make the decision about whether they want us to have an Alberta pension plan. That's what the reason, I mean, we've had this conversation going on in our province for as long as I can remember. I remember 2001, the firewall letter was written by professors at the University of Calgary, including Stephen Harper, who became prime minister, talking about how do we assert the rights in Alberta the same way Quebec has. Quebec has a pension plan. They have their own collection of taxes. They have their own police force. They manage their own immigration. And so this conversation has been going on for a very long time in Alberta. My predecessor started the process with the Fair Deal panel. The Albertans asked for us to do an analysis. The analysis was done. We've released it, and now it's up to Albertans to tell us if they want to move forward and develop our own pension plan. We wanted them to know what we're entitled to under the Act because we overpay, and those dollars have compounded. We'd be entitled to $334 billion on the basis of the formula that's in statute. And that would allow for us to reduce premiums by $1,400 on employers and employees, as well as increase the amount of money that we're able to give to seniors. But it is up to them. And so that's part of the reason why we put it forward to them. How the money gets invested would be a secondary consideration. I think the main thing that the finance minister was pointing out is that these decisions aren't going to be made by politicians. When you do set up, especially something as important as pension, because we do manage a huge amount of pension assets already, we have to make sure that we have an independent board of advisors that are managing the assets for the best returns of the ratepayers. Politicians really shouldn't be involved in those decisions.
So referendum is forthcoming?
If we get some positive feedback from Albertans that they want a referendum, we will know very soon. I mean, our first town hall had 12,000 people on it, and we're continuing to get feedback coming in from all sources on the website through our survey. We'll have a pretty good idea of whether Albertans want it to go to a vote, and I'll let the panel finish their work. They're going to report back to us in May, and we'll know what the path forward is at that point.
There are a number of Albertans who are upset that you allegedly dropped your promise to enshrine protections for the unvaccinated in human rights legislation. Now, didn't you actually campaign on that before? Why the change of heart?
It wasn't the right way to do it, and I was persuaded of that by my caucus. I mean, part of what you do when you're a leader is you put forward ideas, and then part of what you do when you become premier is you have to listen to your team around you. And so they wanted us to take a bit more time in looking at the ways that we could do those protections. So I asked Preston Manning if he would do a study on that. It's almost complete. I think he's intending to give me the final report by the middle of November, at which point we'll make it public. And it goes through in great detail. I've asked him through the terms of reference to look at all the ways in which we can make sure that we manage the pandemic in the future better than we did in the past, and make sure that we protect rights. But what I will say is that I made it very clear when I got elected that I believe that these are private medical decisions, that people should talk to their doctor, make their own personal choice. It was my expectation that people would not be discriminated against. I made that expectation very clear to my own government, to the business community, and from what I can see, that is being respected in Alberta, and I'm glad for that.
The 1 Million March for Children grabbed international headlines. Many people are really upset that SOGI, or sexual orientation and gender identity, is being used by teachers as a tool or resource in schools. Now, SOGI obviously is not part of the Alberta school curriculum. But Premier Smith, let me ask you, will it be in the future?
I'm watching what's happening in other jurisdictions, and I'm very, I'm acknowledging the concern that parents have. Parents, quite rightly, want to be involved in their kids' lives. They don't want secrets being kept from them. At the same time, we also know that kids who are going through a lot of confusion around puberty, gender identity, they also need to feel safe and supported. So we're trying to figure out what the right balance would be, and watching what's happening in other jurisdictions to make sure that we are doing any legislation in a way that respects everybody. So we haven't made a decision on that yet. We've got some motions that are going to be debated at our upcoming AGM. We've had caucus discussions. We're seeing what's happening in other jurisdictions, and if we feel like we need to move on legislation, then we'll make that decision at a future point.
A bill was voted on this week to stop those struggling with mental illness from qualifying for medical assistance in dying. After the break, we tell you if the bill passed or not. Don't go away.
Individuals have full autonomy over their life and their death, versus many other people like the EFC who are saying all lives are sacred.
Welcome back. A bill to prevent the Trudeau government from expanding MAID, or medical assistance in dying, to include those who battle with mental illness was defeated this week in Parliament, meaning that this spring those struggling with their mental health could seek to end their lives through euthanasia. Our next guest, David Goretzky, is with the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada. He says, according to a poll they recently ran, that the majority of Canadians do not want to see the MAID bill expanded to include those struggling with mental illness. What are the proponents of MAID saying? Why do they believe that it's a positive thing for individuals to qualify for MAID just based solely on mental illness alone?
Right. Well, there's kind of two lines of thought there. I think that most of the proponents would be saying, on the one hand, people are autonomous individuals and should be making choices about their own life. So I think it's really setting up kind of a contrast between a worldview that says individuals have full autonomy over their life and their death, versus many other people like the EFC who are saying all lives are sacred. All people, all individuals are made in God's image. All people are loved by God, and it's really not up to us to make a decision about our own death. We just see that as kind of the fundamental difference between the two. Mm-hmm. The bill, the mental illness was actually raised as a possibility by some proponents because they saw it as discriminatory, not being able to access euthanasia on the basis of mental illness. And so that was the original challenge, was that it was a discriminatory thing. So that from a legal perspective, that's what they were talking about. Okay. Of course, there's probably other views other than that, but I think those would be kind of the fundamental views from the proponents.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so what kind of feedback then are you hearing from physicians, if any? Are they supportive or against MAID based solely on mental illness?
Well, of course, like with all things, there's a mixture of opinion. Just like the general population, there's those who are for and those who are against. But we are actually hearing quite a bit of reservation, especially amongst the mental health and psychiatric communities, and saying, number one, even from some of the psychiatrists and specialists, mental health specialists, who are actually in favor of MAID in kind of a general kind of way, are expressing serious reservation about whether this is a way forward. the former head of the Canadian Psychiatric Association actually put out an open letter to MPs. And although he is in favor of MAID in sort of in principle, he's seriously opposed to MAID for mental illness, saying that it will target vulnerable people. When people have various types of mental illness, this is precisely at the time when they need help. Offering MAID as a solution to a mental illness seems completely wrong-headed. And this is coming from the head of the Canadian Psychiatric Association.
Fascinating. So if Bill C-314, if this doesn't pass tomorrow and it continues on into the spring and it becomes a thing, if somebody wanted to, take part in MAID and they have mental illness, are there certain qualifications in terms of like, well, you need, a psychiatric evaluation or this or that? Do you know anything about that, David?
Yes. So the safeguards, there really are very few, if any, safeguards left. And this is part of the alarm that the psychiatric community is actually raising, psychiatric and mental health communities, because there really are no safeguards. If someone goes, for example, to a general physician, a family doctor with mental illness and requests this, there does need to be some kind of assessment with the person, with not necessarily with a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but just someone, a mental health specialist. And if that mental health specialist actually okayed that request, that person could be eligible then for MAID within 90 days of the request. So within 90 days they can. So what we're really pointing out is that in so many cases with mental health issues, even to get an appointment with a specialist is difficult in Canada right now. There's wait lists of a year and more than a year just to get into mental health specialists. That points to the vulnerability of many people and how vulnerable people will be who are desperate for some help, perhaps can't get the help either because they just have no access, and that's a significant problem. And for many people who don't have insurance.
After the break, we feature a highly competitive sport that only 2% of its participants make it to the upper rankings. Can you guess which sport it is? Find out next.